So my research is focused on using techniques in AI, like, for example, machine learning, or techniques that allow us to reason about data, and really applying those techniques on systems like sensor networks or even robot systems. And I'm really interested when these systems are used for general and public use, particularly when it comes to our health and offering better services when it comes to health for everyone.
Yeah. Would that be small gadgets or apps or?
No, more creating systems that could be, for example, smart environments, or creating systems that perceive what's happening around it, either by interpreting images, and it could be medical images, or other types of sensors that can help us measure what's happening around us.
Yeah. And what are the biggest challenges in that area, would you say?
Well, there are a lot of challenges. One of them is that a lot of these systems are working with non-experts. And non-experts, I mean people who aren't an expert in the technology per se. And it means that the technology needs to be fairly robust, and it also needs to work in these kind of very dynamic environments. So if you imagine you have a smart home, our homes are constantly changing places. The furniture is maybe moving around somewhat. It can sometimes get a little bit messy. And also as individuals, we're also changing. Our health status is changing. And this is really a challenge for automation, because traditionally automation is used to being used in these really controlled situations like a factory.
Yeah.
And when you start bringing machines out of the factory and into the homes or into public spaces, these machines really have to be smart so that they can communicate to us, but also so we make sure that they don't harm us in any way.
Yeah. And are there any particular findings you find extra interesting?
Yeah, so we've found a couple of things over the years, and in particular when we've tested our research with end users. One of them is, as I mentioned before, that we really need AI. To just simply put machines without AI often creates a lot of problems, simply because we don't have that ability for the machines to be flexible, and we don't perhaps have an ability to interpret the data in a meaningful way. But I think the other finding that has really surprised us, but also I think has made us very happy about it, is that we've seen that developing AI solutions together with end users is a very socially interactive process. Researchers come into contact with the users. You have to discuss a lot about the technology, and often this fear that technology will remove social interaction, at least for us in the beginning phase of developing solutions, hasn't really been true.
And do you have any examples of AI that's working today in homes in a good way?
I think a few examples that we can see is in smart homes, where you might have a number of, let's say, simple motion detectors. Now, if you take one motion detector on its own to detect whether there's a motion in a room, I mean, basically you get a yes-no answer, right?
Yeah.
But let's say you would allow these motion detectors to talk to each other. If they could speak to each other and share their information, you could actually infer or draw conclusions about what's going on in the home. So for example, if you see that there's a motion in one room, but it stops, you would expect that it would go to another room. And if it goes to the other room and it stops, like let's say it goes into a hallway and it stops, but the motion doesn't go into any of the other rooms, then you know something has happened in the hall.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is you can get an algorithm to reason about that information the same way you and I can. And it's simple sensors, motion detectors, it's simple data, but by using a little bit of intelligence, we can actually get a really complicated functionality.
Yeah. So going forward, what would you say are the most important aspects to think carefully about when it comes to AI?
Right. So there are some really important technical aspects, things like privacy and security and safety, that you have to make sure that the conclusions that a system is making are reasonable conclusions and are protecting the integrity of individuals. But then there are also non-technical aspects, things like acceptance and trust. Do we trust systems that draw conclusions about us, even if those conclusions show to be perhaps more correct and more reliable than what a human expert can reach? Will we trust it? It's kind of the same thing I tend to ask my students. Will you go into an airplane when there's no human pilots? And many of them won't, even though with sort of common sense, we know that many of the problems in aviation are actually caused by human error.
Yeah.
So these are aspects that we really have to keep in mind. But I really want to stress, as I said before, that a lot of us are talking about AI, and the key word here is not AI, it's talking. A lot of us are meeting and discussing about potentials and dangers, and really the fact that we're creating forums like Vitalis, but also other forums where we're willing to lift these questions, I think is really important for development.
Yeah. Amy Loutfi, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.